His hand was at her throat before she could scream. Valentina Greco hit the wall so hard the framed certificates rattled against the plaster. Diplomas from Yale, commendations from the Chicago Chamber of Commerce, awards from a man who had never once earned them honestly. Enzo Carraro had the kind of face that made people trust him at parties. Right now, pressed this close, she could see what lived behind the charm. Nothing, just calculation and cold. "You want to tell me," he said softly, "how a waitress from the South Side ends up with my private ledger in her bag." His grip tightened. Not enough to cut off air, he was too controlled for that, just enough to remind her that he could. Valentina's fingers clawed at his wrist. Her vision sparked at the edges. She'd spent 6 months getting inside Enzo Carraro's world, 6 months learning the layout of his restaurant empire, his legitimate fronts, his Wednesday dinner meetings that were never about food. 6 months for this one moment, one document, and she'd been 30 seconds from the exit. 30 seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about." She kept her voice level, even as her throat screamed. "I dropped a tray. I came in here to apologize." He smiled. Beautiful teeth, dead eyes. "You dropped a tray, 40 feet from the kitchen?" He reached into her server apron with his free hand and produced a slim folder, black cover, gold initials. His initials. "And you picked up this." The office door opened. Every muscle in the room shifted. The man who entered didn't knock, didn't need to. He wore a charcoal jacket over a black shirt, no tie, like formality was something he'd decided long ago wasn't worth his time. Dark brown hair, sharp jaw, a scar above his left eyebrow she'd noticed 3 times before she'd made herself stop looking. Marco Ferrante, the other name that moved through Chicago's underworld like weather. You didn't fight it, you just tried to survive it. His eyes landed on Valentina's throat, on Enzo's hand around it. Something shifted in his face. Not shock, not even surprise, more like recognition of a problem he was going to have to solve. "Enzo." His voice carried the particular quiet of men who never needed to raise it. "Let her go." Enzo turned his head but didn't release her. "This doesn't concern you, Ferrante." Marco stepped inside the office and closed the door. One motion. Casual. "She's with me," he said. Valentina had never seen him before tonight. Enzo's grip loosened by degrees. His gaze moved between them, calculating, suspicious, the look of a man running odds in his head. "With you," he repeated. "New hire." Marco crossed to the sidebar and poured 2 fingers of scotch without being invited, without acknowledging the weapon in the room. He set the glass down and looked at Valentina. "I told you not to come up here." She understood the game the moment he said it. The tone wasn't warm or protective, it was annoyed, commanding, the voice of a man whose employee had gone off script. She dropped her chin. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ferrante, I got turned around." The tension in the room changed. Not gone, never gone in spaces Enzo Carraro occupied, but redistributed. He released her throat and straightened his cufflinks like none of it had happened. "Next time, keep your people in line. This is my building." Marco's eyes stayed on Valentina, reading her. "It won't happen again." They left the office 2 minutes later, Marco's hand pressed to the small of her back, not gentle, not asking, and Valentina understood she'd just traded one danger for another. The question was which one had killed her father. He walked her through the restaurant's service corridor and out a side exit onto Michigan Avenue. November in Chicago stripped everything down to essentials: cold air, bright lights, the distant sound of the L train. He stopped at a black car and held the door open. She didn't move. "I don't know you." Her voice came back to her now that Enzo's hand wasn't wrapped around it. "I don't know why you covered for me in there, and I'm not getting in your car until I do." Marco looked at her for a long moment. Not the way Enzo looked at her, clinical, suspicious. Something different, like he was recalibrating something he thought he'd already figured out. "Because he would have killed you," he said simply, and the night was already complicated enough. He gestured at the car. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to be alive long enough to make that decision yourself." She got in. He slid in beside her, and the driver pulled into traffic without being told. The ledger sat between them on the leather seat. He didn't reach for it. "Where did you get that?" he asked. She looked at his profile. Sharp, clean. The scar above his eye caught the passing streetlights. "From his office safe. The combination is his mother's birthday." She paused. "February 18th, 1941. He turned to look at her. "You've been in that office before?" "No." She met his eyes. "I've been learning Enzo Carraro for 6 months." The city slid past the windows. She could see him adjusting something in his thinking, recalibrating what she was. "Why?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "That ledger has names, signatures, payments going back 11 years. She looked out the window. "One of them is my father's name, and the date beside it is 3 days before he died." Silence sat between them, not the comfortable kind. "What was your father's name?" Marco asked. She looked at him. "Luca Greco." Something happened in his face. Not much, a micro-shift in the jaw, a stillness in the eyes, but she'd spent 6 months learning to read small tells in powerful men, and she caught it. He knew the name. The car crossed into the Gold Coast and descended into a private garage beneath a building that didn't have a public address. Marco's world announced itself quietly, no flashy guards at the entrance, no ostentatious display, just men who appeared from shadows at exactly the right moment and disappeared the same way. Inside, the elevator rose to a floor with dark hardwood flooring and the smell of espresso coming from somewhere deeper in the space. A woman appeared from a side room, mid-40s, fitted black dress, dark eyes that swept Valentina head to toe and catalogued everything they saw. "Nico's been calling," she said to Marco, 3 times in the last 20 minutes. "Tell Nico I'll call him when I'm ready." He handed her the ledger without ceremony. "Copy everything. Physical copies, not digital. Lock it in the secondary." The woman took it. Her eyes moved to Valentina one more time. Then she was gone. Valentina stood in the middle of the room and watched men move around her with the choreographed efficiency of people who'd long since stopped questioning who gave orders and why. "Who are you?" she asked. Marco turned from a conversation with one of his men. "You know who I am." "I know your name," she crossed her arms. "I know Carraro wanted you at his dinner and you didn't come. I know the men in this room would walk through glass for you. And I know," she paused, watching his face, "that you recognized my father's name." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. The men around them found reasons to be somewhere else. "Marco Ferrante," he said finally. "My family controls 5 territories on the north and west sides, distribution, construction, 3 legitimate hotel chains." He looked at her without flinching. "And 11 years ago, I was 22 years old, and my father made a decision that ended several lives, including, I think, your father's." The air went out of the room.
"Tell me," she said. "Not tonight." He moved toward an inner hallway. "Tonight you're in danger, and I need to manage that first." He looked back. "Come." She followed because she didn't have another option, and because something about the way he said "your father's" told her he'd been carrying the weight of that name for a long time. The second floor of Marco's building was different from the first, less operational, more lived in. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a kitchen that smelled like someone had been cooking marinara for hours, and a man who looked like Marco 20 years younger, with 20 more reasons to be angry about it. Nico Ferrante sat at the kitchen island with a glass of red wine and the expression of someone who'd been waiting long past his patience. He looked at Valentina, then at his brother. "Enzo's already calling it a theft," Nico said. "He's saying one of his staff took private documents and that a Ferrante interfered." He set his wine down. "So that's the story that's going to be on the street by midnight." "Let it be," Marco said. "Marco," Nico's voice dropped. "This is the worst possible time for a war with Carraro. We're 3 weeks from closing the harbor deal. If Enzo pulls his support..." "He won't." Marco opened the refrigerator, found a container, set it on the counter. He looked at Valentina. "Are you hungry?" She blinked. Are you seriously? Eat or don't, but the conversation takes time. He moved to the stove. Nico stared at his brother, then at her, then back. Something shifted in his expression. The irritation didn't disappear, but something else arrived alongside it. Interest, the kind that came with a different kind of danger. Nico Ferrante, he said to her, younger than Marco by maybe 3 years, with the same dark features and none of the restraint. He smiled, and it was the kind that made you forget it was carefully calibrated. And you are? Valentina Greco. The name hit him differently than it had hit Marco, not recognition, more like a door opening. He reached for his wine. Greco, like the... Yes, she said quietly, like that Greco. Nico looked at his brother's back. Marco stood at the stove with his shoulders carrying something heavier than before. Ah, Nico said softly. The smile didn't vanish, but it became something more complicated. Then this is going to be a very interesting few days. The text came through on Nico's phone at 11:47 p.m. He read it and set the glass down with a sound that made Marco turn from the stove. Nico held the phone out. On the screen, a photograph, Valentina, taken from a security camera in Carraro's office. The angle caught her face clearly enough. Carraro had the footage. Below the image, a message from a number Valentina didn't recognize. Give me the girl or the deal burns. You have until morning. The kitchen went completely still. Valentina looked at the photo of herself, 6 months of careful invisibility erased in one camera frame. Her cover was gone. Her apartment was gone. Any place Carraro's people knew she'd been was gone. She looked up. Both brothers were watching her. The difference between their expressions told her everything. Marco had already moved to the next problem. Nico was still in this moment, and his eyes were asking a question she wasn't ready to answer. He's not getting her, Marco said. The words landed flat, final, the way a vault door closes. Nico set the phone on the counter. Marco, he's not getting her. He turned off the stove, looked at Valentina with an expression that held no warmth and no apology. You're staying here tonight. Your life changed 6 minutes ago. I need you to understand that. He waited until her eyes met his. You don't leave this building without me or Nico. You don't contact anyone. If you have a phone, give it to me now. She thought about fighting. She thought about the ledger and her father's name and the date 3 days before he died. She held out her phone. He took it. His fingers brushed her palm for half a second, and she felt the contact all the way up her arm. Good, he said. Now come with me. I'll explain what I can. What he can, not everything. The distinction felt like a locked room she needed to find the key to. She followed Marco Ferrante deeper into his fortress, leaving Nico in the kitchen with his wine and that complicated expression, and the certainty that wherever this ended, she was already too far inside it to pretend it hadn't begun. Marco's office on the building's 3rd floor was the kind of room that told you everything about a man. Dark wood, ordered chaos, a whiteboard covered with names and lines that meant nothing to her yet, a window that looked out over the city with all its lights pretending to be stars. He sat across from her at a low table, not behind the desk. The desk was for people who needed the barrier. Luca Greco worked for my father, he said. No preamble, no softening. He was an accountant, smart, careful. He'd been with us for 4 years. Valentina's chest tightened. She made herself breathe. Go on. 11 years ago, my father discovered that Enzo Carraro had been skimming from a shared operation. Money that should have been split was going into Enzo's private accounts. Marco's jaw flexed. Your father found the discrepancy. He brought it to my father, which is what he was supposed to do. She waited. My father sat on it. The words came out flat, like they'd been carried a long time. He was afraid of a war with Carraro, so he buried the information, paid your father to stay quiet and move on. He didn't move on, Valentina said. Marco met her eyes. No, he didn't. He kept a copy of the evidence. He paused. Enzo found out, and he made sure Luca Greco was never going to tell anyone what he'd seen. The room was very quiet. Your father, she said, and her voice only shook slightly, knew he was going to go to the authorities? That's what Enzo believed. Whether it was true, I don't know. My father never told me the full truth until he was dying. He made me promise to find out what happened to Greco's family, made me promise to make it right. His eyes held hers. I never found you until tonight when you walked into Carraro's restaurant and started taking his building apart. She absorbed this, sitting across from the son of the man who had failed her father in the middle of the night with nowhere else to go. And the ledger I took, she asked, has Enzo's full financial history, enough to put him away. Marco set the glass down. It's also what he's willing to go to war for. He looked at her steadily, which means you are now the most valuable and most dangerous person in Chicago. She didn't sleep. At 3 a.m, she found the kitchen and sat at the island with a glass of water and her thoughts. Nico found her 20 minutes later. He wore a dark t-shirt and no pretense, moving through his own home with the ease of someone who'd never had to hide anything about himself. He opened the refrigerator, found leftover pasta, and held up the container in a question. She shook her head. He heated it for himself and sat across from her, eating with no ceremony. Can't sleep? He asked. Your family had something to do with my father's death, and now I'm sleeping in your house. He looked up from the pasta. Fair assessment. He ate another bite. For what it's worth, Marco's been looking for your family for years. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. No. He set down the fork. He looked at her, really looked, not calculating, not managing, something quieter than that. How old were you? 17. She wrapped both hands around the water glass. Nora, my younger sister, was 12. My mother worked 3 jobs for 4 years before she got sick. She stopped. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel guilty. I know. His voice came out softer than she'd heard it before. I'm asking because I want to understand. There's a difference. She studied him, Marco's brother, same dark eyes, same strong features, but where Marco carried his weight inward, Nico wore it openly, the anger, the charm, the grief he hadn't named yet, more dangerous in some ways because of it. You're nothing like your brother, she said. His mouth curved. I've been hearing that my whole life. He picked the fork back up. Marco shows you the wall. I'm the door. He paused. Sometimes that's better. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. She found herself almost smiling. Which is it now? He looked at her over the pasta container with an expression she wasn't prepared for, warm and very awake, and something that made her think of all the wrong things at 3 a.m.
I'll let you know, he said, when I figure it out. Morning came with a phone call that Marco took in the hallway with his voice low and his face doing the controlled, closed thing she was starting to recognize as his version of alarm. He came back into the kitchen where Valentina and Nico were eating, in the particular careful silence of 2 people trying not to look at each other. FBI, Marco said. He looked at Valentina. They've had Carraro under surveillance for 2 years. They know the ledger exists, and they know someone took it last night. Nico set his coffee down. They're going to want it. They're going to want her. Marco's gaze stayed on Valentina. As a witness, protected testimony. The word protected should have sounded like a solution. It sounded like a cage. Witness protection, she said. Disappear, new name, new city. Alive, Marco said. Which is not a small thing. She thought about her sister, Nora, in Milwaukee, finishing her nursing degree, oblivious to all of this. She thought about 6 years of waiting for this moment. She thought about the ledger sitting in Marco's secondary safe and whether handing it to the FBI meant justice or just meant someone else controlling the story. What do you want? She asked Marco directly. He met her eyes without flinching. Carraro in a cell. The Ferrante name cleared of what my father did. He paused. And you, safe. In that order, something shifted in his jaw. No. Nico watched his brother with an expression Valentina couldn't quite read. She looked between them, the 2 men who'd become her landscape overnight, and understood that whatever decision she made, she was making it for all 3 of them. She found Marco on the building's rooftop that afternoon. He stood at the railing with his back to her, looking at the city, a cup of espresso going cold beside him. She stood beside him without speaking. Below, Chicago moved through its Tuesday with no idea what was happening in this building. "Your father," she said eventually. "How did he die?" Marco was quiet for a moment, the same way men in this life usually die. He trusted the wrong person. He turned the espresso cup in his hands. 3 years ago, heart attack officially. But his heart was fine at his last physical, and the man who found him had reason to want him gone. He set the cup down. Enzo Carraro has been very thorough. She absorbed this, the reach of it, the years of it. "He took everything from both of us," she said. Marco turned to look at her. In the afternoon light, with the pretense stripped away by circumstance and exhaustion, he looked less like the careful, controlled man of last night, more like someone who'd been holding something very heavy for a very long time and starting to understand he didn't have to do it alone. "Yes," he said, "he did." She reached out and placed her hand on the railing beside his, not touching him, just close. He looked down at her hand and then out at the city, and the silence between them held something that neither of them was ready to name. Footsteps on the roof door. Nico appeared with 2 fresh coffees and stopped when he saw them. His gaze moved from Valentina's hand to his brother's face. Something flickered in his expression, quick, carefully suppressed. "The FBI liaison is downstairs, wants to talk tonight." Marco turned from the railing. "Tell them tomorrow," Nico nodded. But before he left, his eyes found Valentina one more time. Something in them that she felt in her chest. 2 brothers, 1 woman, and a ledger that was going to make everything impossible. The call came at 7 p.m. It came to a number that shouldn't have existed, a private line Marco used for family only, locked behind 3 levels of security. He answered it in his office with the door closed, and his voice went completely flat. Valentina heard it through the wall because she'd been standing in the hallway about to knock. She heard 3 words clearly. "How did you?" Then silence. Then, "Don't touch her." She pushed the door open. Marco stood with the phone pressed to his ear and his face doing something she hadn't seen before. Not controlled, not calculating, cold with something that ran deeper than anger. He looked at her when she entered, and the look confirmed everything. He lowered the phone. "Enzo knows you're here." The floor shifted beneath her. "How?" Marco's gaze moved to the hallway behind her. She turned. Nico stood in the doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression she'd never seen on him. Not the open warmth, not the charm, something older and more difficult. "Nico," Marco said, very quiet. "Did you make a call last night?" Nico stepped inside the office and closed the door. "I made a negotiation." His voice stayed level, but something in it bent. "Enzo was going to find out regardless. I gave him the building without the floor number, bought us time, kept the harbor deal alive." The silence that followed was the kind that happens before structural collapses. "You told him she was here," Marco said, each word separated from the next. "I told him she was somewhere in our protection." Nico's jaw tightened. "It's not the same thing. I didn't give her location. I gave him enough to keep him from burning everything down overnight while we figured out our next move. She's not a piece to negotiate. She was going to be a piece regardless. Get out." Marco's voice dropped so low it almost disappeared. "Get out of this office right now." Nico looked at Valentina. Something passed through his expression. Not quite an apology, not quite justification. Something in between that felt like watching someone realize they'd miscalculated something irreversible. He left. Marco turned to her. Whatever he'd been holding behind the control had edges now. "I'm sorry. He shouldn't have." "He did what Ferrante men do," she said quietly. "He moved pieces on a board." She looked at him. "You were going to do the same thing, weren't you? At some point, the ledger for protection, me for the deal." Something crossed his face that she couldn't name. Pain, maybe, or the recognition of who he'd been before tonight made it impossible to be that person in front of her. "No," he said. "Not you." He held her gaze. "Not ever you." She wanted to believe him. she wasn't sure she could afford to. If you're still here, you already understand that this isn't just a story about danger and desire. It's about what happens when two men who've never chosen anyone choose the same woman. Marco Ferrante built walls around everything he cared about. Nico Ferrante opened every door, and Valentina Greco came looking for justice and found something that complicated every decision she'd ever made. Subscribe, because the people who stay for this kind of story understand that the most dangerous place to be is exactly in the middle. The second safe house was on the north side, a brownstone on a quiet street with parking in back and neighbors who'd learned to ask no questions. Marco drove. Valentina sat in the passenger seat. Nico was somewhere behind them in a separate car, following at a distance. They didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. The silence had texture. You could feel him thinking. "Your brother made a choice he thought was strategic," she said finally. "My brother made a choice that was about himself." Marco's hand stayed steady on the wheel. "And you? What have you been using me for?" He glanced at her. "What do you mean? You put me in the guest room, you brought me coffee, you told me about my father, which nobody forced you to do." She turned in her seat. "Why? You could have handed me to the FBI last night. Clean, simple, obligation discharged." He was quiet for a long time. The city moved past the windows. "Because I looked at you in that office and I saw someone who'd spent years working towards a single moment of truth, and I know what that costs." He exhaled slowly. "Because my father owed yours something, and because—" He stopped. "Because," she pressed, "because the moment you looked at Enzo Carraro and didn't flinch, I stopped thinking about obligation." The car moved through an intersection. She stared at the dashboard and felt something rearrange itself in her chest. The brownstone had 3 floors and the particular quiet of a place no one had laughed in recently. Valentina chose the top floor, the room with the best sightline and 3 exits. Old habit. 6 months of learning to survive in Carraro's world had changed some things permanently. Nico found her there 2 hours after they arrived. He knocked. She opened the door and didn't say anything, just watched him. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me an apology. I owe you both." He stood in the doorway without trying to come in, like he understood that the threshold meant something. "What I did last night was a calculation. The harbor deal is worth $40 million to the family. Enzo's support is the difference between it closing and falling apart." He looked at her steadily. "I told myself I was managing the situation. I wasn't. I was managing my own fear." She folded her arms. Fear of what? His jaw worked. Of being the brother who couldn't handle it, of Marco cleaning up another mess I made. He looked away, then back. "I've spent my whole life in his shadow, and I told myself that was fine, that I understood my role." Something shifted in his expression. "And then you walked into our kitchen at 3 in the morning and sat there like someone who'd been carrying weight long enough that she'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be permanent." She held very still. "I see you," he said, simply. No performance, no charm. Not as leverage, not as a problem to manage. "I see you, Valentina." He paused. "And I handled that completely wrong." She studied his face in the dim hallway light, the earnestness in him that Marco never let himself show, the openness that was both his greatest asset and his most dangerous quality. "You need to figure out," she said carefully, "the difference between seeing someone and wanting them." He looked at her for a long moment. "What if it's both?" She closed the door, softly. She stood on the other side of it for 60 seconds, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, feeling the particular ache of a situation with no clean answer. The call came at 2 a.m. Marco's phone. The FBI liaison, not tomorrow, now. Enzo Carraro had moved. He'd released a public statement. A Ferrante employee stole documents related to an ongoing civil dispute. He was pressing charges. He'd already spoken to 3 members of Chicago city government who owed him. By morning, Marco's legitimate businesses would be under review, freezes on accounts, investigations into the construction licenses. It wasn't just pressure, it was demolition. Marco stood in the hallway outside Valentina's room and made 4 calls in 8 minutes. His voice stayed low and controlled, and the men on the other end of the line understood from his tone that the situation had escalated beyond management into territory that required a different kind of response. Nico appeared from his room, already dressed. He heard. They stood in the hallway together. The two of them, the particular silence of brothers who'd fought and hadn't resolved it and didn't have time now. "He's forcing our hand," Nico said. "If we wait on the FBI..." "We're not waiting," Marco looked at him. "Tonight, we do this ourselves. The ledger goes to the FBI with a full witness statement." Marco's jaw set. "And Valentina stays here. She doesn't go near what happens tonight." Nico paused. "She's not going to like that." "No." Marco looked at his brother's door. He turned back to Nico. "But she's going to be alive to be angry about it." Something moved in Nico's expression, the friction between them, the thing unresolved, and then he nodded once, slow, because whatever their differences, they had always understood this: some things mattered more than being right. "Let's end this," Nico said. They were already moving down the stairs when Valentina's voice came from the hallway above them. "I heard everything." She stood at the top of the stairs in dark jeans and a jacket, her hair pulled back, her face set with a particular expression of someone who'd made a decision and was done renegotiating it. Marco turned. "Valentina, he killed my father." Her voice didn't shake, not even slightly. "I have been working toward this moment for 6 years. You don't get to decide I sit it out." The brothers looked at each other. "She's right," Nico said quietly. Marco's jaw tightened. He looked up at her at the top of the stairs, this woman who'd walked into Carraro's building alone with a stolen ledger and a 6-year plan, and understood that arguing was a waste of time he didn't have. "Stay behind me," he said. "No deviations." She came down the stairs. Her eyes found Marco's first, then Nico's. The three of them moved toward the door. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The operation was simple in construction, brutal in execution. Marco's men had spent the night quietly repositioning around Carraro's primary holding, a warehouse on the south side that served as his real office, his real boardroom, the place where the ledger's entries had been made. The FBI had been watching it for 2 years. Tonight, Marco was going to give them something to watch. They arrived in 2 cars, 4 men total, plus the 3 of them. Valentina sat between the brothers in the back seat and felt the shift in both of them, the way violence coming settled into men who knew how to carry it. Not excitement, not even readiness, something quieter, resignation and resolve in equal measure. "When this is over," Nico said to the windshield, "we need to talk about what happens next." Marco turned to look at him. "One thing at a time." "I mean about her," Nico said levelly, matter of fact, like he was discussing logistics. "We need to have the conversation." The car was very quiet for a moment. Valentina looked straight ahead. "I'm right here." "I know you're here," Nico said. "I'm saying it because you should be part of the conversation, not after, not when it's convenient, now." His eyes held hers. Marco's jaw was tight. He looked out his window. "Nico," Valentina said quietly. "I know what you're going to say." Nico turned back to the windshield. "You're going to say it's not the right time, that we need to get through tonight first." He exhaled slowly. "You're right. I just need you to know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Both of you." The car stopped. Outside, the warehouse, dark, and the distant shapes of men moving into position. Marco put his hand on the door handle. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at Valentina in the darkness. His hand found her jaw for half a second. Rough palm, careful touch. "Stay close," he said. "I mean it." She nodded. He got out. She sat there for 1 breath, 2, feeling the impression of his touch and the weight of Miko's words and the strange grief of a moment that contained too many impossible things at once. Then she got out and followed them into the dark.
The warehouse interior was vast and cold. Fluorescent lights over concrete floors, industrial shelving, the kind of space that could hold a great deal and leave no record. Carraro's men were there. Valentina counted 6 before Marco's signal moved everything at once. It was precise and efficient, and nothing like anything she'd seen in 6 years of research. 3 minutes of controlled chaos that left 4 men restrained and 2 fled into the night where Marco's people outside were waiting. And then Enzo Carraro in the center of the warehouse floor, his expensive suit, his careful composure, looking at Marco Ferrante across 15 feet of concrete with the particular expression of a man who'd calculated this exact scenario and was still running numbers. "Marco," his voice carried the warmth of a man at a dinner party, "you brought your brother. How fraternal." His eyes found Valentina. "And the Greco girl. I should have finished this 11 years ago." The casualness of it, the way her father's death passed through his lips like a footnote. She took 1 step forward. Marco's arm came across her path. Not harsh, just there, a wall made of one man's certainty. The ledger went to the FBI 40 minutes ago. Full chain of custody, witness statement from an independent source. He looked at Enzo without expression. "It's done." Something moved across Carraro's face. Not fear, men like him didn't carry fear near the surface, but recalculation, the rapid internal revision of what could still be salvaged. "You understand," Enzo said quietly, "that if I go down, I take your family's name with me, everything your father touched, everything you've built on top of it." "I know," Marco said. "I'm making that choice anyway." Nico stood to Marco's left, quiet and still. He caught Valentina's eye. Something in his expression, respect maybe, and grief, because what Marco had just done was not just hand over a ledger. He'd handed over years of protected secrets. He'd chosen her father's justice over his family's safety. He'd chosen truth over the machinery of a life built on compromise. He'd chosen her in the only language men like him knew how to speak. Enzo Carraro looked at Valentina one more time. "Your father," he said, "was a coward. He saw the truth and ran to it instead of away from it." "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. "He was honest. That's not the same thing as a coward." She looked at his face and felt 6 years of carrying it suddenly, finally, set down. The FBI came through the warehouse doors 2 minutes later. The next hours moved like water. Statements, agents with earpieces and careful faces, Marco in a separate room for a long time, Nico beside her in the hallway with bad coffee from a vending machine, and the particular exhausted quiet of people who've been through something they can't walk back. "He's going to be okay," Nico said. "Marco, he's handled worse." She looked at the closed door. "He gave up a lot tonight. He gave up the weight of what my father did." Nico turned the coffee cup in his hands. "He's been carrying it for 3 years, since the deathbed confession." He looked at her. "I think he needed someone worth putting it down for." She looked at him sideways. "Nico." "I know." He met her eyes. No charm, no strategy, just him. "I know what I feel for you is real, and I know," he paused, something passing through his expression that looked like it cost him, "that it's not what you feel for him." He looked at the door. "I see the way you look at my brother, and I see the way he doesn't let himself look at you unless he thinks no one's watching." He turned back to her. "I'm not built like Marco. I don't have his patience or his walls, but I'm also not going to tell myself a story about you that isn't true." She felt something ache in her chest, the particular grief of caring about someone without it being the whole story. "You deserve someone who can give you everything," she said quietly. He smiled, and it was the realest version of it she'd seen. "I know," he said. "I'm working on that. Start with not falling for women who are in love with my brother." She laughed, soft and surprised. He laughed too. The ache didn't disappear, but it became something they could both hold. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're going to be extraordinary." He looked at her. His eyes held it for a moment. All of it, the what could have been, and the resignation, and the genuine warmth that was simply who Nico Ferrante was underneath all the strategy. "I know," he said, and I believed him. The FBI cleared the Ferrante building by dawn. Enzo Carraro was in custody. The harbor deal, without Carraro's artificial leverage, restructured itself into something cleaner, something that didn't require anyone's silence. Marco sat on the steps of his building in the gray morning light. He hadn't slept. His jacket was draped over the railing. His sleeves were rolled up. The control he wore like a second skin had loosened enough that you could see the edges of the man underneath. Valentina sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The FBI wants my testimony formalized. Full deposition. Could take months. I know. And your family's involvement in the original cover-up, your father's silence, that's going to be part of the record. I know. He looked at his hands. I told them everything I knew. The night my father told me, the names, the timeline, all of it. His jaw tightened briefly. I owed him that. The morning light caught the scar above his eyebrow. She'd been telling herself not to notice things like that for 3 days. What happens now? She asked. The family restructures. Without the Carraro connection, some things become harder. Some things become possible that weren't before. He looked at the street. Legitimate work has its own complications, but they're complications I can live with. And Nico. Something shifted in his expression. Nico and I will be fine. We always are. He paused. He told me this morning that he talked to you, that he stopped. I waited. He said, Marco said carefully, that you were worth getting it right for, even if that meant getting out of the way. I felt my throat tighten. He's going to be remarkable, she said softly. He already is. Marco looked at her. The morning light stripped all the armor away. Just him without the careful management. Valentina. Yes. I've been holding something at arm's length since the moment I walked into Enzo's office and found you against that wall. His voice came out lower than usual, the words working through something tight. I kept telling myself it was obligation, my father's debt to yours, a problem I needed to solve. He held her gaze. It was never that. She didn't look away. I know. His hand came up slowly, nothing sudden, nothing that demanded anything, and his fingers curved around her jaw. She tilted her face up.
I spent 6 years alone with this, she said, carrying it, not letting anyone close because close was a liability. She felt her voice catch slightly. And then you told me the truth about my father on the first night. You didn't have to. You could have managed me, just like Nico did. But you told me the truth. I couldn't lie to you. The words came out like an admission, like something he hadn't meant to say but couldn't stop. From the moment I saw your face, I couldn't lie to you. She closed the small distance between them. The kiss was quiet, not desperate or consuming, something more patient than that. The particular tenderness of two people who'd arrived at something real through everything that had been in the way of it. When she pulled back, he pressed his forehead to hers and exhaled slowly. What happens now? She asked again, the same question with a different weight. His thumb moved against her cheek. Now, he said, you testify, the trial runs, we rebuild. He paused. And you let me be close enough that close stops feeling like a liability. She pulled back enough to look at his face. The morning light, the quiet street, the city that had almost taken everything from both of them. Rowan Doyle is going to need a new hotel manager, she said, and smiled. He blinked. Who? Nobody. She shook her head. Bad habit, referencing other stories. She took his hand. I'm here. Just here. His fingers laced through hers. 3 months later, the trial of Enzo Carraro opened in federal court. Valentina sat in the third row on the prosecution side and gave her testimony over the course of 2 days. Her voice was steady. Her memory was perfect. She'd been preparing for this for 6 years. She did not flinch when Carraro's attorney tried to establish inconsistencies. She did not waver when the defense suggested her motivation was revenge rather than truth. She looked at the jury and told them exactly what she'd seen, what she'd read in a private ledger, what it meant and what it had cost. Luca Greco's name appeared in the official record for the first time since his death certificate. He had been honest. He had been afraid. He had tried to do the right thing in a world that killed people for it. And now, finally, the right thing was being done in return. Outside the courthouse on the final day, Marco waited on the steps. He was in a charcoal suit that fit him exactly right, his hands in his pockets, watching the street with the particular alert stillness she'd learned to read as his version of waiting. She came through the doors and he turned, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked down the steps and he met her halfway. Nico was there too, a few steps behind Marco, leaning against the railing with his phone and a coffee. He looked up when she appeared, and the smile he gave her was completely genuine. The grief in it had become something useful, shaped, carried, made into something that looked a lot like maturity. He gave her a small nod. She gave him one back. Marco took her hand. She felt it all the way through her. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. She looked at the courthouse behind her, at the building that had held her father's name for 2 days and given it back clean. "What do you want?" Marco asked quietly. She thought about 6 years of solitude, 6 months of careful invisibility, 3 days that had changed everything. "Breakfast," she said, and then she looked at him. "I want to figure out what's next, together." He squeezed her hand. Something moved across his face that she'd seen before and finally had a name for. Not control, not calculation, just him, the unguarded version, the man who told the truth when he didn't have to. He loved her, she'd known for a while. She loved him back. She'd admitted it at about 3 this morning. "There's a place on State Street," Nico said from the railing, already moving. "Best eggs in the city. I've been telling Marco for 2 years. Marco looked at his brother. Something passed between them, the particular language of brothers who'd nearly broken something irreplaceable and chosen to repair it instead. "Lead the way," Marco said. Nico started down the sidewalk. Marco and Valentina followed, her hand in his, her father's name finally at rest, her own life finally, irrevocably beginning. The city moved around them, indifferent and brilliant, and none of them looked back. Valentina Greco came looking for justice and found 2 brothers, 1 truth, and a love built on honesty in a world that kills people for it. Nico Ferrante learned the difference between wanting someone and setting them free. Marco Ferrante put down the weight his father left him and chose the only thing that mattered. Some love stories begin in danger. Some begin in grief. The best ones begin in truth. And this one ended in all 3. If this story found you when you needed it, share it with someone who understands that justice and love are not opposites. They're just different names for the same refusal to look away. Subscribe so these stories keep finding the people who need them. And if you want to see what Nico Ferrante finds when he's finally ready, when the brother who learned to let go discovers someone worth holding, drop Nico in the comments, because some men's stories are just beginning. This is Italian-American dark romance, and nothing here was ever truly over.